Can you see us? Can you hear us?
I can see you and I can hear you. Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. I'll just make this official. Welcome from Geneva.
Thank you.
It's great to have you
from Geneva, sir.
It's great to have you here in sunny Australia at the moment. So I now welcome Miss Alejandra Cruz-Ross from the International Labour Organisation, appearing via video teleconference. So if you could just please give us your name and the capacity in which you appear today.
Thank you, Chair. Greetings from Geneva. I wish to first thank the committee for extending me an invitation to participate in this hearing. My name is Alejandra Cruz-Ross, and I'm here representing the International Labour Office. This means I am part of the Permanent Secretariat of the International Labour Organization, or the ILO. And in my testimony today, I will refer to the International Labour Organization. I will say ILO. And when referring to the International Labour Office, I will say the office. Just allow me to add as a disclaimer to protect my organization that the introductory notes submitted to the inquiry and my statement and answers here today reflect my views and opinions as the transport specialist of the office, but can or may not reflect officially those of the International Labour Organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz-Ross. And I've had the pleasure of sitting through a few ILO hearings in Geneva with the road transport sector of the ILO, and I'll tell you, it's been absolutely amazing when you can see governments from around the world, unions from around the world representing hundreds and thousands of transport workers. So congratulations on the great work that you're doing over there. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to please make an opening statement, and this is your opportunity to tell us on the Hansard record everything you want to get out.
Thank you. I will start my statement by saying that the ILO is the United Nations agency overseeing the world of work. And it is an international regulatory agency that was established in 1919. And one of its founding principles is that universal lasting peace can only be established as it is based on social justice. The ILO promotes jobs and protects people. The ILO is the only United Nations agency with a tripartite constituency that is composed of 187 member states and representatives of workers and employers. In terms of its sectoral regulatory work, the ILO has been concerned for many decades on the working conditions of commercial drivers, and in particular, in two of its most defining challenges, their hours of work and the labor inspection. More recently, the ILO authorized an update of its work for the road transport sector, and with that intention, tripartite constituents provided the office in 2015 with a mandate to prepare draft guidelines to be discussed at a meeting of experts. And therefore, the meeting of experts to adopt guidelines on the promotion of decent work and road safety in the transport sector was held in Geneva from the 23rd to the 27th of September 2019. It was chaired by Dr. Humphrey Mapuranga from the government of Zimbabwe. And then we had three vice chairpersons that were Mr. Jerzy Klinewski from Poland for the government group, Mr. Miguel Pereira Garcia from the employer group, and Mr. Michael Kane from the workers group. The meeting was attended by 78 participants, including 7 government, 8 worker, and 8 employer experts. Their advisors, 30 government observers, and 7 observers from official and non-governmental international organizations. Women constituted 39% of the overall participants and 28% of the ILO-funded experts. I submitted and bring you here today as the office for your consideration the guidelines on the promotion of decent work and road safety in the transport sector that were adopted in that meeting in 2019 and that have been approved for dissemination and publication as an ILO official document by the governing body in March 2020. So the guidelines can be considered to update 80 years of ILO work in the road transport sector and constitute the ILO deliverable for the United Nations Decade of Action on Road Safety, and also for the work carried out by the United Nations Special Envoy on Road Safety, in addition to contributing to a number of sustainable development goals for the 2030 agenda. The coverage and application of this tool is truck drivers, short and long haul, and as well as coach drivers for the long distance. The guidelines tackle a wide range of decent work opportunities and challenges related to employment creation, working conditions, occupational safety and health, social protection, social dialogue, professionalization, training, contracting, formalization, monitoring and inspection, amongst others. You will see they're quite extensive. It's a holistic tool. The range of application will help with tackling what in some regions is the elephant in the room, because these guidelines do not make a distinction between employed drivers and subcontracted or owner drivers or informal drivers. They bridge a gap for policymakers and industry to tackle road safety aspects with their subcontracted or informal operations. This category represents a quite considerable proportion, and in some countries even a very large proportion of the total number of drivers or of freight moved. Also, these guidelines seek to help with the uncomfortable truth that in some cases, large industry players might have robust road safety programs and measures for their own few employees that happen to drive, but no road safety programs or measures for all of their subcontracted transport operations. And many companies contract their whole truck and passenger services. The main innovative concepts contained in the guidelines and agreed to at the international level on a tripartite basis by workers, employers, and governments can informally be summed up as follows. 1, the guidelines make for the first time at the international level a direct link between road safety, decent work, including sustainable payments, and supply chains. It is a link that has been controversial for many decades. 2, the guidelines present as an innovation the concept of chain of responsibility by starting to define who are the parties to a road transport chain. 3, you will be able to observe the provisions create a linkage between sustainable payments, chain of responsibility, and adequate inspection systems. 4, the documentation of arrangements and fair recruitment increases transparency and can be linked to road safety, and thus the guidelines encourage governments to address the fact that the lack of documentation undermines serious efforts to enforce and inspect for road safety purposes. And 5, the guidelines include a paragraph on the promotion and implementation of due diligence in accordance with the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. This means a remedy framework to ensure and respect the fundamental principles and rights of the work of commercial drivers. And this to include, as far as practicable, all road transport chain parties, employers and employers' associations. I think I will leave it at here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cruz-Ross. And as I said, I've had the privilege of witnessing the work of the ILO in Geneva around road transport. And also I've done a fair bit in the United States of America with the Teamsters. But one thing I don't know is I've seen some stuff from the European unions, and I remember vividly one of the most magnificent, or not magnificent, one of the most hard-hitting videos when there was a truck driver in his cab somewhere in Europe when he was saying they're laughing in New York while we're crying in our cabs in Europe over the disgraceful treatment of truck drivers just being left to live in their trucks while they're looking for work. But can I ask you, And what I am getting the picture painted very clearly, it doesn't matter where we go around the world, that road transport is an integral part of every nation's supply chains, of course, but also of their economies. And yet, all around the world, truckies get treated very similar. It's chasing their tails, being undervalued, not getting paid properly, road safety is compromised, fatigue management and the like. Is there anywhere, Ms. Cruz-Ross, with the work that you've been doing internationally, where there is a country on this planet that actually says we value our supply chains, we love our truck drivers and our transport operators, and this is what we do for them to protect them, not only to be remunerated properly and on time, but actually to leave home every day, go out and be as safe as possible, and then come home at night to their loved ones? Can you point me to one country that's got it right?
We at the ILO, well, one of our main tasks is actually to document practices from countries. Now, we haven't done recently a general survey or an official survey where we send official questionnaires to countries to really know how they reply and what they're implementing. Now, what I can say from desk research that the office has been carrying out is that, well, in many parts of the world, unfortunately, truck drivers are still informal or non-wage earning, which means they are basically subcontracted. And this does not help the situation. Now, from the regulatory perspective, countries have different ways of implementing the regulation, and from those you can the countries that have invested a lot in regulating the sector can be, for example, the European Union, then Canada, Australia, the United States, and the Scandinavian countries. From those, they regulate differently. But one thing that, and actually that is tackled here also in the guidelines, is that you might have good regulatory frameworks, but one of the most fundamental things is also to have an effective inspection mechanism. Yep. Because you might have the most advanced and the best, what you might consider the best regulatory framework, but if there is no money invested in inspection and in avoiding that between jurisdictions, for example, there is no adequate enforcement or authorities are not speaking to themselves, then the regulation, well, looks very well on paper, but it's basically not applied. So in that sense, I can mention that for the meeting of experts, we did extensive desk research on the regulatory frameworks applicable in Australia, applicable in Canada, in the United States, in the EU, and the Scandinavian countries. And from those, we try to extract the best principles that are included, the best practices that are included here. But I did wish to do that, to make that caveat that notwithstanding having excellent regulation, one of the weak points or the weak link is also investing in adequate inspection systems, documentation of the arrangements so that authorities have the way of really inspecting the sector. Mm-hmm.
Oh, look, you are spot on. I wouldn't dare say Australia leads the way in the best regulations, but one thing I can say is, unfortunately, the enforcement, for want of for many reasons, whether it be lack of personnel, lack of funding and all that, in Australia it's a gaping hole. Although we've just heard from the previous witnesses who have told me that things are starting to get a little bit more serious. And talking about enforcement and all that sort of stuff. Now, you mentioned the chain of responsibility. So, Ms. Cruz-Ross, when I was 20 kilo lighter and about 30 years younger, we were talking about the chain of responsibility here in Australia and how this was going to be the silver bullet. This is going to tidy up our supply chains, our truckies will stop getting fined, our decent, hardworking and reputable and respectable transport companies won't get pinged, I shouldn't say that, won't get fined, it'll go up the chain to the end supplier. Well, it's been a total disaster over here in Australia. How's it gone around the world? Are there any great examples in some jurisdictions where the chain of responsibility is the silver bullet?
Well, what we documented when doing performing the desk research for the zero draft of the guidelines is we found there is chain of responsibility also contained in an EU directive, but was not at that time, around 2017, 2018, being implemented in many countries of the EU. Now they've started to implement it more, no? And they have modified this, but the regulation, once again, the regulation was there, but it was not being implemented. There's also another example of chain of responsibility that we found in Mexico, and that mostly pertains to creating chains of responsibilities when the truck driver received an overweight truck, no? And if there was a crash as a result of the truck being overweight, they included in some of the documentation a particular sentence on chain of responsibility in view of overweight operations. So those would sum up, I understand the examples that we have on chain of responsibility from the country level. Now, from another ILO tool that was adopted in 2013, we also have the principles of chain of responsibility that had been included there, and that is the ILO UNECE Code of Practice on the packing of cargo transport units, also known as the CTU code. Yeah. And that code, basically what it regulates is the box or the container that goes behind the truck. And these guidelines is the cabin of the truck, no? Of course, the CTU code, well, regulates the packing of containers so you avoid accidents in ships, in trains, and also in trucks. And in that code, it was detailed and it was negotiated from 2011 to 2013. That code actually took 4 meetings of experts, and it was an interagency effort between the IMO, International Maritime Organization, the ILO, yep, and the UNECE. And in that code, there was, for the first time, let's say at the international level, in a transport product, no, a transport tool, the detailing of what constitutes chain of responsibility and who is responsible if a container has an issue in a port that is 5,000 kilometers away from where it was packed, no? And how you do the tracing through the contracting of the chain. So we based ourselves in those country examples and international examples to include in the zero draft the principles of chain of responsibility that were later discussed by tripartite constituents, and they reached consensus on that. Because basically, through the chain of responsibility, there's an acknowledgement that it's not only the direct either worker or employer linked to that truck, but also other parties that might influence on road safety, have an influence and have a responsibility at the end of the day if there is a crash.
And have there been many successful prosecutions of the chain of responsibility around the world that you could direct us to? Someone who's really got it right? Someone who's very good at not only talking about it, but actually doing it?
Those were the research that we carried out, as I detailed, for including those principles in the zero draft of the guidelines.
All right.
So we did not do any research on prosecution.
No worries, Mr. Cruz-Ross. Thank you very much. There's a lot going on in your world. I understand that. Now, in your opening statement, you talked about unfair recruitment. What is unfair recruitment?
Well, in some cases, what we found through research was that some workers might commit to, or some companies might have as a practice to pay for the training of drivers and then commit the drivers to work for them for a certain period of time, and sometimes pay them underneath. So let's say I'm a driver, wish to go through commercial truck training, and then X company says, okay, I'll provide you the training, but then you need to work for me 2 years. And so then the truck and make them sign a contract that afterwards, if they decide to leave this commitment, they have to pay fines, they have to pay the training at exorbitant prices, and they're not able to leave basically the arrangement. So they undergo through the training, and then the company pays them underneath what would be, for example, market value, for their work. So they end up working basically for nothing during that time, and they cannot leave that arrangement. So in that sense, we consider, that's one of the ideas that was behind this unfair recruitment practices, that basically can lead to exploitative work to coercion.
Right. And also in your opening statement, you talked about the link between remuneration and safety. And we're very well aware of some of the fine work by Dr. Balzar, who we heard from earlier on today. Now, we've been having discussions about that for many, many years. There's still some people in this nation who refuse to believe there is a link between remuneration and safety. But tell me what work and what studies you've done around that in the ILO.
We basically conducted, again, desk research, sir, because what we do is document best practices and do literature reviews. That's the funding that we have, to extract the best practices. So we did an extensive review of all the literature that links pay and safety. And from there, actually, when preparing the zero draft, we included some other provisions that were more linked to either fixing machinery, tripartite machinery at the national level, or through Convention 131, which is the minimum wage convention. So those were the paragraphs that were drafted originally in the zero draft for the meeting. Now, the meeting actually, the participants to the meeting, the experts, took a long time discussing this issue. And I can submit also to the inquiry if you want the report for discussion. There were discussions and negotiations surrounding this. And actually, it is the tripartite constituents of the ILO that reached an international agreement on what constituted sustainable payments to be included here as, promoting road safety. So these paragraphs that you will see in the guidelines, that basically are in Section 6, Part A, Sustainable Payments. All of those paragraphs were new text, that was negotiated, and this is basically the tripartite international agreement on what would constitute the payment and the link there is between these payments and road safety, and decent work. So that's basically it's a tripartite consensus at the international level that was endorsed later by the ILO governing body.
Yes, and I've seen the tripart group in operation. It is very powerful, very powerful. When you said it took a while, how long is a while?
Well, the meeting was 5 days, sir. So probably this was, these negotiations took probably 2 days, because there were also strong discussions on the scope of the guidelines. So that was one of the main points that took a long time to negotiate. And then also the issue of sustainable payments. And actually, there was a small subsidiary group or a small working party that informally went out of the room, out of the plenary, to start drafting the text to later bring it to the plenary to discuss. So, and this was actually negotiated until the very last day. So, so it took probably, you know, it was one of the issues that was being discussed through half of the meeting probably.
And
Yes.
I can tell those listening, there's a lot of truck drivers listening at the moment, it's being broadcast around Australia, that when the ILO goes into plenary discussions, they don't finish work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It goes well into the night. So that was a great effort.
Yes.
On that, Ms. Cruz-Ross, I'm going to thank you very much for putting some time aside to speak to us here in Australia. And I do have a tight timetable I'm trying to work to. I really appreciate that and thank you very much. And good luck with the report that was put down by the meeting of the experts to adopt the guidelines on the promotion of decent work and road safety in the transport sector. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, I thank you for your invitation. It was a pleasure to be here and an honor.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much. Thank you. Right,
Bye-bye.
now we will call our next witnesses, the Australian Tax Office.